Welcome back to the Informal Game. My name's Griff. I got Chris over there behind the camera. We've been getting a lot of comments about how to do wilderness adventures, so I thought maybe today we could do a little tutorial on basic referee wilderness skills, so stay tuned. Recently I was at a game convention and I ran an adventure, and like usual I ran it using these old books here. And what's interesting about if you're going to run like a really old school adventure is that I didn't do any pre-planning. You know, the whole thing was just an off-the-cuff procedural game where you use the charts and rules that are in these books. So I'm going to show you something kind of interesting about wilderness adventures. When the original game came out, the very first few pages told you what you needed to use to play a game. And if you look inside this book right here, it says right here you need a copy of Dungeons and Dragons, and right underneath that, after that, it says you need a copy of Outdoor Survival. Well, Outdoor Survival is kind of a strange one, because if you read further, you realize that it's a game that's made by Avalon Hill Company. It's not made by the same publishers, G&K Enterprises, that produced the original Dungeons and Dragons. So it was kind of like a family board game, and the whole goal was to not die of thirst or starvation and somehow get to a safe place off the map. So here is the Outdoor Survival game map. It actually should be oriented this way, but we had to put it sideways in the book. If you want a copy of this, we'll make sure to put a link down in the description for you, and you can just download a free copy of this to print out. There's no need to get the book. So anyway, this is the map that was used early on for wilderness adventures. Dave Arneson used it in his Blackmoor Campaign. After a while, he got tired of having his players just doing like dungeon dives all the time, and he wanted them to do other things, so he moved them all down to this map. So I ran this map at a game convention not that long ago, and I didn't really have any plan for it or anything. I didn't know what to do, and I realized that a lot of people want to play old school Dungeons and Dragons when I'm running things at conventions. So my friend Paul Stormberg said, why don't you just run a game on this Outdoor Survival map right here? And so I did that. I kind of used the original rules, but they're always the original rules are interesting because they're always evolving. So they're, in a sense, they're still very contemporary. It's just up to the referee to make them contemporary by changing things to suit whatever the referee needs. And I had 8 players, and I had each of them roll up 3 characters, and I told them that they could get 40,000 experience points for one of their characters. They could pick the best one, and that one would have 40,000 experience points. But then instead of just killing the other 2 or not using them, I said those are your retainers, and you get to bring them along as your hirelings. So everybody was running 3 characters, which is really easy to do with this system because it's so simple. And everybody had fun. And the other thing about it is that because we're playing the old game, there are the basic rules, which are the 3 books here, right? And then along with that, you get the supplements. And the supplements each add something different. They have different classes in them and different monsters and things. So it's kind of like going over to your friend's house to play a game of poker. They just establish the rules, the house rules for the night playing poker. And it's a lot like that when you're playing original D&D with the supplements and the original books. So I told them we'd use just the Greyhawk supplement and the 3 little booklets. And they rolled up characters, and then I gave them a little background. I just said that the Earl of Vestfold had been so focused, along with the Baron of Blackmoor, in fighting off the Egg of Coot, that they've sort of lost track of keeping the southern realm under control. And so the Earl is concerned because the troops have been used mostly just protecting the realm from the Egg of Coot, which is invading from way north, and so the southern realm has been ignored a little bit. And although there's no threat of war down there, the wildlife, the dragons and other nasty critters, have started to move in, and they've sort of lost touch with the southern areas, and they're rumored to be bandits on the roads and stuff, and so it's a lot more dangerous, and the communities are getting isolated. And so the player's job is just to go down there and visit as many places as they can and get an idea of what's going on, reassure everybody that the Earl is concerned and wants to start civilizing things down there again. And there's sort of the first wave that's going to go down there. And that was pretty much it, and we just started playing. It's actually really interesting. If you look at the map here, I just want to talk a little bit briefly about the map. It doesn't really show you all the details, but Dave Arneson added some roads in here. So I'll just highlight those. I won't highlight all of them. But there are roads here that go between places. And I think there's one coming down through here over that bridge. So there are roads going all over the place on this map that allow you to travel a little bit faster through rough terrain, and it also prevents you from getting lost, which I'll talk about in a minute. What's interesting about this is that we're using this map, and we're also using, here I'll just set this map aside, we're also using the wilderness rules that are in this book here, which is kind of I always call it the Dungeon Master's Guide because it predates the DMG, but it's the equivalent of the DMG. And this book is interesting because it has a lot of charts and a lot of fun charts in there. One of the things in here, there's a whole section after talking about dungeon adventures, a whole section. I mean, we're talking about a section of the book that is about 6 pages, 8 pages long, something like that. It talks about running wilderness adventures, and this is very early on, so everything is kind of primitive, and you, as a referee, you have to kind of ad-lib and improvise and inject your own sort of adventure story elements into this. So, in fact, even if you look at this page here, Outdoor Survival, it says right there, offhand adventures in the wilderness are made on the Outdoor Survival playing board, explained below. Then it talks about the board, and then on this page it talks about movement rates. It's very simple. Before it talks about movement rates, it just talks about if you run into a castle, you roll randomly to see who lives there, and then you also roll who their guards are that are in the castle. Super basic stuff. One would want to augment all of this with your own ideas when you're playing because it's almost too simple in a way. I mean, I don't really know how much, I'm not really familiar with a lot of the modern games, but pretty much every game you play is based on Dungeons & Dragons on some level. So even if you're playing a different system, what I'm talking about here fully applies to whatever you're playing right now. Even if it's a sci-fi game or whatever setting, it's still, the basic concepts are all there. First thing you want to do is you want to look at your system. This system has a movement rate. Every system, your system will have one too. But using these rules, you get a number of hexes that you can travel in a day. It's really straightforward. They had a cart with them, so they were limited in going about 4 hexes a day. I believe, I'm not sure if they have a movement bonus in the rules here for going on roads, but there's also limitations on, if you look at here, they have like limitations on what kind of terrain, or terrain penalties, and so it costs you 3 movements to go through a hex of mountain or swamps. Well, if you're going 4 hexes a day, that means that you really can only travel through 1 mountain hex a day. And then on top of that, they have other rules for things like running into creatures out in the wilderness. And all of this is very procedural and kind of mechanized. So it's like a paper computer program, basically. And if you look here, you can see they list the different types of terrain that you can go through, that is. And along with the list of what type of terrain you go through, there's a possibility each turn that you'll get lost, and there's a possibility for an encounter. So if you're going on a road, you're probably not going to get lost, but you still have the chance for the encounter. So every turn, you would look at the terrain that the players are in, and you would roll to see what happens. It's not very specific, and so it might be possible to travel through a couple different types of terrain sometimes, so you kind of have to wing it and decide where the encounter happens. One thing I like to do is just do like a time die roll, and so kind of decide where in the day the event happens. So if I roll high like a 6, it means that the encounter happens when the party is camped out for the night, and so they should definitely set guards, or at least watches for the night, to make sure they don't get surprised while they're all sleeping. And so I just roll, hey, look at that, they got a nighttime encounter. What was really fun about it is it's just interesting watching people get engaged with a game that should be really simple. It looks simple. We're using simple charts, right? The map is super simple. If I lay it back down here again, the players actually did come down this road, and they followed it all the way down, and they came down to this marker here, which is supposed to be a castle, I suppose, but I decided to make it like a hill fort, like a Bronze Age hill fort. And so they visited the hill fort and made friends with the people and talked to them. One of the characters was running a paladin, and he declared that he literally had Blackmoor flags with him, and so before he left, he put a flag on the wall of the town to mark it as being under the control of the Earl once again. And then they traveled down this way and through this pass and down. What's interesting also here, as I was playing, I hadn't planned this at all, but this is one location where, I'll do it in a nicer color. This is one location where, if you look really closely, the map shows there's like a little X right here. And X always seems to be like a good place to have something bad. So I deemed that it was some sort of evil wizard, and so they wandered down there and encountered the castle, and they didn't go very close because it just looked scary and ominous. And then if you look here, they kind of decided to go north again, but instead of traveling on the road they came down, they wanted to squeeze between the river and the mountains here and work their way up to the city on the map. And they never did get that far because they ran into a bunch of gnolls. That's the other interesting thing when you're rolling. I'll just show you what I was doing for the adventure as far as encounters. At one point they ran into, trying to think, I think the first adventure was trolls, so they got giant types. And basically you've got this really simple chart. It's got, I'll slide it over a little bit here so it's easier to see it on the screen. You've got your chance for encounter based on where you are, and they couldn't get lost at that point because they were on a road. And then, since they were in a clear area, I must have rolled a 3, which says giant, so then the encounter, rolling a d8, said giant, and I would go down to the giant chart, and I got trolls. And so they had this big encounter with some trolls. They got attacked by, I believe it was 7 trolls. So you can imagine you've got 8 players each running 3 characters, so that's 24 characters. That's 24 different PCs taking an action each turn. You got 7 trolls, which each take, when they are in combat, they each have 3 attacks. So you've got 21 attacks. And we had this giant battle, but it was just really fast. We just played it really fast. I would just point. I just went around the table using parallel actions. So I was like, you, what are you doing? You, what are you doing? You, what are you doing? We just go around the table, everybody do their attacks, and then the trolls, I'd just roll to see who was getting attacked really fast, and this person's getting attacked, this person's getting attacked. And we did a giant battle in maybe a half an hour. It was really fast and very fun. The other encounter they had during that adventure, of course, they had the hill fort encounter. The only other encounter they had was they ran into gnolls, which was also, I rolled again that it was on the giant chart. So they ran into gnolls, only this time gnolls, number appearing for gnolls, if you look at the old rules, is some ridiculous number. Let me see what we've got here. Gnolls, 2 to 200. So they ran into, I think there are about 180 gnolls. So they ran into this encampment of gnolls. One of the characters wanted to investigate what was going on, so he snuck up on the camp, rolled some dice to see if he'd get spotted. He got spotted. The next thing you know, the gnolls, a bunch of them are running out of camp to chase that guy down. He goes running back to his own camp. Everybody, well, it's not really a camp. They were moving through the wilderness, but he runs back to his party members, and the next thing you know, we had this big chase through the wilderness with gnolls chasing the party, and that was really fun too. The rules have simple things for like being spotted. There's this whole chart for spotting people, and here it is right here. This is like your party size, and then the number of monsters that are encountered, and then your chance for evading the monsters, and the percentage of like the total number. And I think they were at about 80%. So, and with a group of 24, their chance of evading was really low. And it was one of those situations where, as a game master, I just said, you know what? They're making really good choices. The dice may be saying that it should be a different way, but I don't think it's reasonable that decision of those dice is correct. And so I just kind of inserted myself. I tend to not do that all the time, but the big problem with Wilderness Adventures, and why a lot of people didn't run them back in the early days of D&D, is that the rules were so primitive that with these probabilities that you've got here, it was really easy for a group of adventurers to go out into the wilderness and within, 2 weeks of adventuring, just get completely wiped out. And so I think a lot of game masters were doing what I did, which was to try to rebalance things. If you're choosing to run away, then maybe you should be given better odds based on the things you decide to do. That pretty much covers everything that I do. It's very simple. When people wanted to know about wilderness adventuring, I was like, well, I don't know if I do anything that complicated. It's just, when I run a game, it's really simple. The complexity comes in when the players start to make decisions about what they want to do and how they react to situations. And then I'm coming up with ideas, of course, doing my reaction rolls with 2 dice, but also just sort of deciding what the monsters are going to do based on what seems reasonable for them to do. And that starts to create all the complex encounters and such that you'd run into in a wilderness situation. The other thing to watch for is, of course, surprise rolls. There's a 1 in 6 chance that either side will get surprised, and so that creates a situation where you can be either at a long range, where you can decide that looks like a bad situation, we don't want to go engage with that thing, we're going to try to run away, or you get surprised or surprise the creatures, and you end up at about a 10 to 30 yard range, and you get some sort of advantage out of that. And that's so similar to just running a dungeon adventure, except for you're just not limited by the constraints of being in rooms and hallways. Like I said, simple rules when you're playing the old game. We also have a link in the description of the map that I used for that game that you can use for your own games, and it's pretty much what people started doing wilderness adventures with back in the day. So you're kind of taking a time machine back to 1974 if you use the map that we've got linked. We'll leave a link to the original rules in the description if you're interested in getting a copy of your own to read through. Thanks for coming by and just checking out our show once again. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video if you enjoyed what you saw discussed today, and we'll see you next time on The Informal Game.